The first thing the camera finds is not the whale. It finds a rib. A pale curve in the blackness, half buried in silt, rising out of the sea floor with the slow authority of something that does not belong to time anymore. Around it, the water is perfectly dark. Not blue, not green, not even the color we imagine when we close our eyes. This is a darkness with weight. It presses against the glass of the submersible. It swallows the lamps at the edges. It makes every small creature appear suddenly, as if the ocean is inventing them one at a time. Then another rib appears. Then a vertebra. Then the long, broken architecture of an animal so large that even its ruin feels impossible. The lights drift forward, slowly, careful not to stir too much sediment from the floor. Particles rise like ash. A crab stands on the edge of a bone, legs spread wide, tasting the current. A fish with a narrow face slides out of sight. A few white worms lift their feathery crowns into the water, so delicate they seem less like animals than weather. And there, behind all of them, under the quiet machinery of the deep, is the shape of a body that has been gone for years. It is a grave, but it is not empty. It is being lived in. At more than 10,000 feet below the surface, where sunlight has never arrived, where the sea is cold enough to numb metal and pressure presses from every side, the remains of a whale have become a crowded neighborhood. Not in the way a coral reef is crowded, with brightness and motion and color openly declaring itself. This place is quieter. It is built from patience, from hunger, from chemistry, from the slow conversion of one life into many. A whale has fallen here, and the ocean has gathered around it. For most of its life, the whale belonged to the upper ocean. It moved through light. It passed beneath storms, under birds and cloud shadows, through waters where plankton bloomed and fish flashed, and the moon could still find the waves. It may have crossed entire basins, guided by memory written somewhere deeper than thought. It may have sung into distances no human instrument could fully understand. It may have carried scars from ice, from ships, from other whales, from seasons when food was scarce and seasons when the sea opened in abundance.
Then, at some hour no one recorded, it died. Maybe it died quietly after a long migration, its strength spent far from land. Maybe illness loosened its hold on breath. Maybe age arrived slowly, not as one event, but as many small failures gathered into silence. Maybe it floated first, a dark island at the surface, attended by birds and sharks, rocking in the swell under an indifferent sky. The beginning of a whale fall is not always a fall. Sometimes it is drifting, sometimes it is bloating. Sometimes the dead animal lingers between worlds, held up by gases inside the body, moved by wind and surface currents, still visible to the living world above. But eventually, if the sea keeps it, the body changes, the air leaves, the tissues soften. The great mass becomes heavier than the water that holds it. What was once a breathing giant begins to descend. There is something almost impossible about that descent. A whale is not made for falling. It is made for traveling, for surfacing, for vanishing beneath waves and rising again. Its body is a language of buoyancy and motion. Yet after death, all of that turns downward. The same animal that once moved through the sea by will now moves by gravity. The ocean receives it in layers. Light fades. The surface loses its violence. Blue deepens, then thins, then disappears. The pressure builds in silence. Around the carcass, small animals may feed as it drops. Fish may trail it for a while. Sharks may tear at it if the body spends long enough in reachable water. But if enough remains, if the whale is not taken apart before it reaches the bottom, it enters a different kingdom. The deep sea floor is often imagined as empty, but that is not quite right. It is not empty. It is waiting. Across vast stretches of abyssal plain, life is spread thinly, cautiously, in forms adapted to scarcity. The food that sustains much of the deep has usually come from far above. Bits of dead plankton, fecal pellets, molted shells, fragments of animals. Tiny remains from the sunlit world drift downward in a slow, continuous rain called marine snow. It falls for days, weeks, sometimes longer, changing as it descends, eaten and reworked by bacteria and drifting mouths. By the time it reaches the bottom, much of its richness has already been taken. What arrives is enough for life, but rarely enough for abundance. It is dinner measured in grains.
Then a whale arrives. Not a grain, a mountain. A body weighing tons settles into mud, and everything nearby is changed. The seafloor, which may have been receiving small crumbs from above for centuries, suddenly receives an entire world at once. Flesh, fat, blood, bone, oils locked inside the skeleton. Carbon that began in sunlight moved into plankton, moved into krill or fish, moved into a whale, and now has come down into the dark. For the animals of the deep, this is not tragedy. It is weather. It is a season. It is the arrival of impossible abundance. The first creatures to find it are often the ones built for distance and scent. In the dark, smell becomes geography. Molecules drift from the carcass into the current, and the current writes a map across the bottom. Somewhere beyond the lamps, somewhere out in the cold plain, a hagfish turns. A shark changes direction. Ratfish, crabs, amphipods, eelpouts, sleeper sharks, and other scavengers begin to appear from the black. They do not need to see the whale from far away. The whale is announcing itself through chemistry. The first stage of a whale fall is not delicate. It is physical, crowded, almost brutal, yet strangely quiet because all of it happens under miles of water. Teeth enter blubber. Jaws worry at muscle. Hagfish knot themselves and pull. Sharks pass through the dimness with ancient economy. Crabs gather at openings in the body. The carcass becomes a banquet large enough to sustain animals that may have gone long stretches without such a meal. The energy stored inside the whale begins to move again, not as swimming or song, but as consumption. A living whale is difficult to imagine in pieces. We know it as shape, as breath, as an arc of back, as a fluke lifting above the surface. But on the seafloor, the body is returned to parts. The tongue, rich and soft. The blubber, dense with stored energy. The muscles that once powered migrations. The skin that once held the sea out. Nothing is symbolic here. The deep does not sentimentalize. It uses what arrives. Yet the use is not careless. Every bite is a transfer. Every torn fragment becomes motion inside another body. A sleeper shark takes part of the whale and turns it into slow movement through cold water. A hagfish takes part of the whale and turns it into eggs, slime, survival. A crab takes part of the whale and carries it into the sediment, scattering nourishment over the surrounding floor. The whale does not vanish. It is redistributed. For months, sometimes longer, the large scavengers work. The sight changes with each visit. The smooth mass collapses. The outline of the animal becomes less certain. Openings widen. Bones show through. The soft tissues thin. What looked like a dead whale becomes a landscape of exposed structure and torn edges. And still, the lights of a submersible, returning after weeks or months, might find life where there was only mud before. Fish in the ribs, crabs under the jaw, hagfish moving through the remains like pale cords. The deep sea is not hurried. Even its feasts take time. Above, in the world of air, decay often seems like disappearance. A body becomes less body. It breaks down, dries out, scatters, returns to soil. In the ocean, and especially in the deep ocean, decay can become architecture. The whale begins as food, then it becomes habitat, then it becomes chemistry. Then, long after the recognizable animal has gone, it remains as a set of conditions in which life can continue. The contradiction is the heart of the mystery. The dead whale is not alive, but the whale fall is. It breathes without lungs. It grows without a seed. It gathers creatures that might never otherwise meet. It becomes an island on a plain where islands are rare. And, like any island, it has arrivals, colonists, specialists, accidents, refugees, opportunists, and ghosts. For scientists, these places are difficult to find. The ocean is too large, the deep too hidden, the event too uncertain. A whale may die far from ships, sink in darkness, land in a canyon, on a slope, in sediment thousands of meters below the surface, and no one will ever know. Even with modern remotely operated vehicles, sonar, cameras, and research vessels, many whale falls remain unseen. Some are discovered by accident, a pale skeleton in the beam of a vehicle looking for something else. Others are created deliberately, using stranded whales that have already died, weighted and lowered to the seafloor, so researchers can watch the stages unfold. There is a strange tenderness in that work. Not because the scene is gentle, but because it requires attention to what the world usually hides. To follow a dead whale over years is to admit that an ending has texture. It has chapters. It has residence. It changes. It becomes less like a corpse and more like a place. The first visitors come for the flesh. The next ones come for what the flesh leaves behind. After the large scavengers have opened the whale and reduced much of it to bone, the drama becomes smaller. The camera has to move closer. The violence of teeth gives way to a different kind of labor. The mud around the body darkens with fat and scraps and dissolved organic matter. Pieces fall from the carcass and sink into the sediment. Fluids seep downward. The seafloor directly beneath and around the whale becomes enriched, almost overfed. And that richness draws animals that do not need to tear open a giant. They need leftovers. They need surfaces. They need softened sediment, bacteria, tiny fragments of tissue, the lingering stain of a feast. This is when the whale fall begins to look less like a meal and more like a settlement. Polychaete worms arrive in numbers. Small crustaceans move through the sediment. Snails appear where there had been none. Brittle stars gather in pale tangles. Shrimp pick at scraps too small for sharks to care about. The whale has changed the ground itself. The mud is no longer ordinary mud. It has become a pantry, a nursery, a chemical field, a place where animals can grow quickly because the usual limits have been suspended. In the deep ocean, opportunity is not evenly distributed. Much of the seafloor is a vast country of small hunger. Food arrives, but slowly. The animals here are adapted to long waiting, to low temperatures, to thin supplies. Many move little. Many conserve. Many live at the edge of what would seem possible from the surface world. But around a whale fall, for a time, the math is different. The energy density changes. Life can crowd. Populations can build. Larvae drifting through the water, if they land near the carcass at the right moment, may find not emptiness, but a future. The whale is now no longer just a whale. It is a patch of altered reality. A scientist watching from a research vessel sees this through screens. The room above is bright, full of cables, monitors, notebooks, coffee cups, quiet voices. Outside, waves move under the hull. The ship rolls. Somewhere below, connected by fiber optic tether or by the long delay of planning and memory, the vehicle hovers over the carcass. Its lamps turn the dark into a small stage. Everyone watches the same image: bones, mud, living things, the patient unfolding of decay. It is one of the strange privileges of science to look at something that would have happened without us and still feel astonished by it. No one invented whale falls. They have been happening for millions of years, long before the first submersible, long before ships, long before any human being stood on a shore and wondered what happened to the giants that disappeared beneath the waves. Ancient whales died and sank. Their bones carried oils into dark sediment. Animals came, bacteria bloomed, worms specialized, communities formed and vanished. The fossil record preserves traces of some of these events, hints in stone that even in older oceans, dead marine giants became islands for life. But we arrived late to the knowledge. For most of human history, the deep ocean was not a place so much as an idea. Sailors crossed it, feared it, named its storms, hunted its animals, mapped its surface. But the bottom was hidden behind pressure and darkness. It was easier to imagine it as empty because emptiness required less humility. Then machines began to descend. Cameras entered places that eyes could not. Robotic vehicles followed cables into canyons and basins. Submersibles touched down on mud that had never known daylight. And slowly, the deep began to show us that scarcity does not mean absence. It means the rules are different. A whale fall is one of the clearest examples. It is sudden abundance in a slow world. It is a temporary city built from a body. But it is also a reminder that the deep sea is not cut off from the surface. The two worlds are connected constantly, vertically, by falling matter. The sun grows plankton. Plankton feed krill. Krill feed whales. Whales die. Their bodies descend. The dark receives the light in another form.
The ocean is not arranged as separate layers so neatly as diagrams suggest.
It is a system of exchanges. Breath becomes carbon. Carbon becomes flesh. Flesh becomes sediment. Sediment becomes microbial energy. Microbial energy becomes food for animals that have never seen the surface but are still, in some distant way, eating sunlight. That is the hidden elegance of a whale fall. It brings the upper ocean down. The whale's life has already been a long act of gathering. In its tissues are migrations, feeding seasons, cold currents, blooms of plankton, swarms of prey, years of growth. A baleen whale filters immense quantities of water, straining tiny animals from the sea. A sperm whale dives into darkness while still alive, hunting squid in regions where sunlight fails. Different whales live different lives, but each body becomes a record of movement through the ocean. When that body falls, the record becomes available to the bottom. The deep does not receive an abstract nutrient pulse. It receives history made edible. And the first stage, the scavenger stage, is only the opening of that history. The second stage is more intimate. It is the stage of settling in. The surrounding sediment becomes busy with animals that are smaller, less cinematic perhaps, but no less important. They are the ones that turn the mess into community. They process what is left behind by the larger feeders. They stir the mud. They feed on bacterial growth. They burrow through enriched patches. They transform the whale's abundance into layers of life that spread beyond the bones. Look closely at the mud around a whale fall, and it may seem animated. Tiny bodies moving between grains, worms threading through sediment, small crustaceans appearing and disappearing with nervous precision, snails tracing invisible roots. Everything is modest in scale, but together it is enormous. The whale has created a radius of consequence. Its influence extends outward beyond the skeleton, into the ground, into currents, into the bodies of animals that will leave and carry some part of it elsewhere.
A dead whale does not stay where it lands. Not really. Some of it moves away inside fish, some inside crabs, some inside bacteria. Some dissolves into the water, some is buried. Some is released slowly from bones over years. Some may eventually rise again through food webs, through migrations of smaller creatures, through the feeding of animals that visit and depart. The carcass appears fixed, but its matter is traveling. The site can be mapped, measured, sampled, named by coordinates, revisited with vehicles and cameras. But the event itself is wider than the map. Every creature that feeds becomes a messenger. Every larva that grows there and leaves carries the whale into another future. The fall is not a point. It is a beginning. The bones remain. At first, they look clean only from a distance. Up close, they are not clean at all. They are covered in films, grazed by small animals, drilled by specialists, stained by bacteria. The skeleton of a whale is not a dry museum structure. It is porous, it is rich. Its bones contain lipids, fats, and oils stored within the matrix, protected long after the outer flesh is gone. For most animals, bone seems like the end of the meal. For the whale fall, bone is the beginning of a much stranger stage. Because inside the bones, the whale has saved a final reserve. To reach it, life had to invent unusual tools. Some tools are microbial. In the absence of oxygen, certain bacteria can break down organic compounds in ways that release sulfide. In the world above, sulfide often suggests rot, poison, the smell of something gone wrong. In the deep sea, under the right conditions, it can become the basis of a food web. This is the same broad principle that makes hydrothermal vents and cold seeps so extraordinary. Life does not always need sunlight directly. Some life can build itself from chemical energy. Around whale bones, as microbes work on the trapped oils, sulfide seeps into the local environment. Bacterial mats form. Chemosynthetic communities begin to gather. Animals that depend on symbiotic bacteria or feed on bacterial production can thrive. Clams, mussels, snails, worms, limpets, and other forms may appear depending on depth, region, the age of the fall, and the conditions of the surrounding seafloor. The whale's skeleton becomes a slow-burning chemical engine. This stage can last for years, in some cases, decades, perhaps longer for the largest whales in the coldest, deepest settings. The body that once rose to breathe now fuels a darkness where breath is impossible. There is no single moment when one stage ends and another begins. The ocean does not obey our labels. Scavengers may still visit while smaller opportunists are thriving. Bacteria may be active before all flesh is gone. Bone specialists may arrive while scraps remain. Succession is a useful word, but the real place is messier, more blended, more alive. It is not a staircase. It is overlapping weather. Still, the pattern matters. Flesh to scavengers, sediment to opportunists, bone oils to microbes and chemical communities, mineral remains to animals that use hard surfaces. A whale fall changes its meaning as it ages, and each meaning invites a different kind of life. The grave keeps opening. One of the most unsettling animals in this story was not known to science until very recently. It had been there, in the dark, doing its work inside bones, long before anyone gave it a name. But to human eyes, it arrived suddenly, as if the whale fall had produced a secret. Scientists studying a skeleton in Monterey Canyon found worms rooted into the bones. They were not simply grazing on the surface, they were entering the skeleton itself. They had no eyes, no legs, no mouth, no stomach, and yet they were feeding. The genus would be named Osedax, meaning bone devourer. The name sounds like something from myth, but the animal is real and stranger than the name can hold. The visible part of a female Osedax worm may look almost floral, a plume extending into the water, colored red by blood, taking in oxygen like a delicate underwater feather. A soft trunk anchors it. Beneath the surface of the bone, hidden from the camera unless the bone is broken or studied closely, root-like tissues spread inward. Those roots house bacteria capable of helping the worm access the fats and oils inside the whalebone.
A mouthless animal eating a skeleton with roots. The sentence feels wrong until the deep sea makes it true. In ordinary imagination, feeding is obvious. A jaw closes, a stomach receives. But Osedax reminds us that life is not committed to our expectations. It can make an organ out of partnership. It can borrow the labor of microbes. It can turn bone into garden, skeleton into soil, death into a place to bloom. The worms do not merely sit on the whale, they enter it. They dissolve its hidden reserves. They make the last richness of the animal available to the wider community. The more scientists studied them, the stranger the story became. Many of the visible worms were females. Tiny males, reduced almost to reproductive bodies, could live inside the tubes of females. The arrangement seemed so improbable that it might have been dismissed as fantasy if it had not been collected, photographed, described, sequenced, and watched. A whale fall is rare and temporary, and Osedax seems built for that uncertainty. Larvae must find bones in a vast ocean. They must arrive before the resource is gone. They must grow quickly, reproduce, disperse, and trust that somewhere in the darkness, another skeleton waits. Imagine the odds. A larva, smaller than a thought, drifts in the deep. Around it is water in every direction, black and cold and immense. Somewhere, perhaps kilometers away, a whale skeleton lies on the bottom, releasing faint chemical clues. If the larva never finds such a place, its lineage ends there. If it does, it enters a world of food, mates, competition, microbes, surfaces, and time. Whole lives depend on the chance meeting between a microscopic drifter and the bones of a giant. This is one reason whale falls matter beyond the single carcass. They may act as stepping stones across the deep sea floor. A species specialized for whale bones cannot survive in one place forever because one place is temporary. The skeleton is consumed, the chemistry fades, the oils run out. The community collapses or changes into something less rich. To persist over evolutionary time, organisms must disperse from fall to fall, from one island of death to another. The map of their world is written in events, not continents, not reefs, not coastlines, bodies. The deep sea, often pictured as a smooth abyss, is actually full of hidden islands of energy. Hydrothermal vents, cold seeps, sunken wood, large carcasses, places where chemistry or organic matter breaks the monotony of hunger. Whale falls belong to this family of oases, but they are different because they begin as animals from another realm. A vent is a wound in the earth, a geological exhalation. A seep is a slow release from beneath the sediment. A whale fall is biography. It was once a moving mind, or at least a moving life, with memory and hunger, and perhaps grief and play and fear. It crossed distances. It surfaced under rain. It carried young, maybe. It listened. It responded. Then it became geology for a while. There is no need to exaggerate the whale to feel the force of that transformation. The facts are enough. A large carcass can carry to the sea floor an amount of organic matter that would otherwise take a patch of deep seabed an extremely long time to receive from the slow rain above. In one estimate, a 40-ton carcass can contain as much organic carbon as a typical hectare of deep sea floor might receive in roughly 2 centuries. Whether imagined as weight, energy, carbon, or simple food, the scale is difficult to absorb. A whale fall is not a snack in the dark. It is a century arriving all at once. This is why the place can become crowded. The deep sea does not ignore such an arrival. The animals that find it may come from beyond the visible range of cameras, drawn by chemical signals, vibration, current, or the movements of other animals. Some may specialize in carrion. Some may simply take advantage when the opportunity appears. Some may depend on the later microbial chemistry. Others may use the bones as hard surface in a world where much of the bottom is soft sediment. The whale offers different gifts to different lives at different times. Nothing about it is simple waste. Even the mud remembers. Under and around the carcass, the sediment may become loaded with organic material. Oxygen can be consumed quickly by microbes breaking down that material. Chemical gradients form. Different bacteria thrive at different depths in the mud, depending on what is available there. Animals burrow, irrigate, disturb, feed, and are fed upon. The site is not just a skeleton with creatures on top. It is a 3-dimensional system extending into sediment, water, bone, and time. The cameras usually show us the visible surface because that is what cameras can show. But most of the work is invisible. Microbes dividing, enzymes breaking molecules, sulfate being reduced, lipids being transformed, larvae settling, chemical traces drifting away. The whale fall is an ecosystem partly made of things too small to film, too slow to dramatize, too subtle to fit into the old idea of nature as spectacle. And yet, it is spectacular. Not because it is loud, because it is hidden and still complete. In the beam of a submersible, the scene can look almost staged. White bones, black mud, red plumes, pale fish, the occasional slow crab, the glitter of suspended particles. But the real drama is not the image. It is the duration. The same bones visited again after a year, then after 5, then after 10. The same skeleton becoming less itself and more community. A whale fall is not one photograph. It is a time-lapse too long for ordinary attention. This is why long-term observatories and repeated expeditions matter. A single dive can find a scene. Repeated dives can reveal a life history. Scientists can watch how species appear, peak, decline, and disappear. They can compare one fall to another, one depth to another, one ocean basin to another. They can ask whether the same stages unfold everywhere, or whether each whale fall is shaped by its own geography, species pool, temperature, depth, currents, and history. A whale that lands in a canyon may not become the same kind of community as one that lands on a flat abyssal plain. A small whale may not feed the deep as long as a large one. A carcass in relatively shallow water may be stripped or disturbed differently than one at great depth. Oxygen levels matter. Temperature matters. The species living nearby matter. Even the position of the body matters.
whether it lands belly down, on its side, scattered, intact, buried, exposed.
Death has variables. The ocean does not repeat itself exactly. Still, the underlying pattern remains hauntingly consistent. The whale falls through darkness. The whale is found. The whale is opened. The whale feeds. The whale becomes bones. The bones feed. The bones become habitat. The habitat fades. The last mineral surfaces remain. Eventually, even the most persistent signs soften into the seafloor, and the grave becomes difficult to distinguish from the plain around it. But by then, the whale has already left. It has left in eggs, in larvae, in tissues, in bacterial mats, in the bodies of scavengers, in sediment chemistry, in the population pulses of animals that gathered there, in the dispersal of specialists searching for the next fall. The whale has become not one afterlife, but many. This is what makes the phrase whale fall feel almost too small. It names the descent, the landing, the body on the bottom. But the event is larger than falling. It is a transfer between worlds. It is the final migration of a whale from the surface ocean into the deep benthic community. It is the moment when a pelagic life becomes a seafloor ecosystem. It is the ocean closing a circle so wide that most of it is invisible from shore. From the surface, the death of a whale can appear as loss. A breath no longer rises. A song stops. A migration route is missing one traveler. That loss is real. But below, where the body settles, the ending is not understood as absence. It is understood by mouths, roots, plumes, cells. The deep does not ask what the whale meant. It asks what the whale still is, and the answer keeps changing. There is a moment in deep-sea footage when the scale becomes difficult to keep in mind. The camera moves close to a worm, a shell, a crab's claw, a patch of bacterial film, and for a while the whale disappears into detail. The frame becomes small. A bone becomes a wall. A ridge in the skeleton becomes a cliff. The eye adjusts to the scale of centimeters. Then the vehicle backs away, and the ribs return, and the skull returns, and the spine stretches into the darkness, and the mind remembers that all of this small life is arranged on the remains of something that once may have been longer than a bus. The deep sea plays with scale constantly. A single amphipod can seem enormous on camera because the world around it is dark. A whale can seem small because the abyss around it is larger than imagination. The carcass is gigantic compared with its residents, but almost nothing compared with the ocean floor. It is a city and a speck, a feast and a coordinate, a world and a point on a map. That paradox is part of the atmosphere of whale falls. They reveal how abundance can be both immense and fragile. To a hagfish, the carcass is an overwhelming gift. To the ocean basin, it is a brief punctuation mark. To Osidax, it is home. To the species as a whole, it is one temporary island in a chain that must continue somewhere beyond sight. The chain depends on whales dying and sinking. That statement can sound almost harsh, especially because whales occupy such a powerful place in human imagination. We have learned to see them as individuals, not simply as biomass. We identify flukes. We record songs. We follow migrations. We name calves. We mourn strandings. We watch them with something close to reverence because their size makes them feel ancient, but their breathing makes them feel near. A whale at the surface seems to share the world with us for a second. It exhales into our air. It breaks the boundary between sea and sky. But the deep sea knows another whale. Not the breaching whale, not the singing whale, not the whale of tourist boats and hydrophones and paintings. The deep knows the whale as descent, as arrival, as a mass of stored energy reaching the bottom after a lifetime in motion. To understand whale falls, we have to hold both truths without simplifying either one. The whale is an animal whose life matters. The whale is also, after death, a resource that allows other lives to begin. Nature is not sentimental, but it is not meaningless either. The meaning is in relationship. A whale feeding at the surface may drive nutrients upward through its waste, fertilizing waters where plankton grow. It may move nutrients horizontally across migration routes. It may store carbon in its body. It may shape prey populations and predator behavior. Then, after death, if it sinks, it may carry part of that body into the deep ocean, where carbon and nutrients enter a different set of processes. The whale is not a creature separate from the ocean. It is one of the ocean's ways of moving matter through itself.
In life, a whale is a current with skin. In death, it becomes a current without movement. The fall itself is difficult to witness. Most descents happen unseen. But imagining it matters, because the descent connects the surface story to the seafloor story. Picture the carcass leaving the last faint blue. Above, waves continue, birds continue, weather continues. A ship might pass miles away and know nothing. Below, the whale moves downward through colder and colder water. Its body rotates slightly, loose tissue trails. Small scavengers take what they can in passing. The pressure increases, but the whale no longer resists anything. There is no fear in the animal now, no urgency for air, no navigation, only gravity and water. At 1,000 meters, sunlight is gone. At 2,000, the body is falling through a realm where living whales themselves sometimes dive, but where this one will never rise. At 3,000, the seafloor may still be far below, depending on where death occurred. Eventually, the descent ends not with drama, but with contact. A cloud of sediment lifts. The body settles. The mud accepts the weight. For a while, nothing may happen that the camera of imagination can see. The whale lies there. Currents move over it. Molecules begin leaving the tissues. The scent travels. Somewhere, a scavenger detects the change. Then the blackness starts to answer. There is a deep strangeness in the idea that a carcass can call animals from distances beyond the light. No voice, no motion, no signal in the way humans usually understand signaling. Just chemistry, released into water, read by bodies. The whale is dead, but it announces abundance. The first arrivals are not random. They are animals whose senses are tuned to rare opportunities. In a food-poor world, the ability to find death is the ability to live. Hagfish are often among the most memorable. They seem almost unfinished, ancient, pale or dark depending on species and light, with bodies that move like wet cords. Their mouths are not jaws in the familiar sense, but toothed plates capable of rasping flesh. They can enter openings, twist, knot themselves for leverage, and produce slime in astonishing quantities when threatened. On a whale fall, their work can be both unsettling and essential. They are not villains in the scene. They are recyclers of a giant. Sleeper sharks, when present, bring a different energy. Slow, large, blunt, almost ghostly. They move with the confidence of animals that do not need haste. A shark crossing the lights over a whale fall can make the entire seafloor seem suddenly exposed. It appears, feeds, disappears. It may leave wounds in the carcass that smaller animals later widen. The food web is not polite. It is layered. Crabs come with their own precision. They pick, cut, test, carry.
Their legs raise them above the sediment like small machines made of hunger. Ratfish and eel pouts move in and out of the ribs. Amphipods may swarm in numbers that turn flesh into motion. Octopuses sometimes appear near whale falls, not necessarily feeding on the whale directly, but hunting the animals drawn there. Predators follow scavengers. Opportunists follow opportunists. The whale changes not only who feeds, but who can be hunted. This is how an ecosystem builds itself around absence. The whale is not doing anything, yet it reorganizes behavior. Animals alter routes, microbes bloom, sediment chemistry shifts, predation patterns change, larvae settle. The entire local environment bends toward the carcass, like iron filings around a magnet. Except the magnet is death, and the filings are alive. A human being looking at such a scene may feel the need to moralize it, to say death creates life, as if that phrase solves the mystery. It does not. It names only the outer edge. The deeper truth is more specific and more interesting. Death creates opportunities unevenly, chemically, biologically, through bodies adapted to use what has been released. A whale fall does not create life in a vague way. It creates habitat, food, sulfide, surfaces, shelter, population bursts, and evolutionary pathways. It creates conditions. Life does the rest. And life does it with astonishing inventiveness. The whale's jaw may become a ridge where animals perch above the mud. Vertebrae may become stations for worms and bacterial films. The skull, with its cavities and surfaces, may shelter fish and invertebrates. The sediment under the carcass may host dense communities unlike the surrounding plain. Bones may be bored, dissolved, colonized, and weakened until they no longer hold their original shape. What was anatomical becomes geographical.
If the whale was a blue whale, a fin whale, a gray whale, a sperm whale, or another large species, the scale and composition of the fall will differ. Baleen whales and toothed whales have different lives, different bones, different migrations, different relationships with prey. But to the deep, a large carcass always means an unusual concentration of organic material. The details matter scientifically. The broad effect remains transformative. The sight is not beautiful in the ordinary way. It is too dim, too cold, too associated with decomposition. And yet, beauty appears not as decoration, but as coherence. A red plume taking oxygen from black water, a white bone slowly turning into food, a crab walking across a rib like a traveler crossing a bridge, bacterial mats spreading in pale sheets over a surface that once moved beneath living skin. The beauty is not clean. It is not separate from decay. It is decay understood fully enough to become luminous. There are places in the world where the boundary between ending and beginning is not a line. A whale fall is one of them. To understand why the whale fall feels so improbable, it helps to spend a little time with the ordinary deep sea around it. Away from the bones, away from the chemical plume, away from the altered mud, the seafloor may stretch for distances that make the word landscape feel too small. Fine sediment settles over everything. The bottom can look soft, pale, gently rippled by currents too slow to notice at first. Animals are present, but often spaced far apart. A sea cucumber, a brittle star, a sponge rising from the mud. The track of something that passed before the camera arrived. Burrows with no occupant visible. A fish resting so still it might be mistaken for debris.
There is food here, but not much at once. The deep sea floor lives on patience. The marine snow that drifts down from above is steady in many places, but diffuse. It is made from tiny remains, dead plankton, waste, mucus, minerals, fragments of shells, pieces of life made small by distance and time. It falls through the water column like the ocean's memory of the surface. But much of it is eaten before it lands. Bacteria work on it. Zooplankton intercept it. Fish and drifting animals take what they can. The deeper it goes, the more altered and diminished it becomes. So the creatures of the bottom are not simply living in darkness. They are living beneath a long chain of subtraction. What reaches them has survived many mouths. Now place a whale in that world. It is almost an ecological disruption, but in the most generous sense. Imagine a desert where the soil receives only dust and a few dry leaves for years, and then one morning an entire forest drops from the sky. Not seeds, not branches. The whole forest, full of sap, shade, wood, fruit, insects, and stored rain. The comparison is imperfect, as all comparisons are, but it gives some feeling for the scale. A whale fall is not simply more food. It is a different kind of event. This is why scientists sometimes describe whale falls as habitat islands. Around them, life can become dense and specialized, while beyond their influence, the seafloor returns to its lower background rhythm. But unlike islands of rock, whale falls are temporary. They are islands that rot, islands that shrink, islands whose shores are eaten from within, islands whose geography changes from month to month until, eventually, the island disappears. That temporary nature shapes everything that lives there. For a scavenger, the question is how quickly it can find and consume. For an opportunistic worm or crustacean, the question is whether it can colonize the enriched sediment while resources remain. For a bone specialist, the question is whether it can reach the skeleton and reproduce before the oils are gone. For microbes, the question is chemical. What compounds are present? Which reactions are possible? Where oxygen remains? Where sulfide appears? Where the gradients are strongest? For predators, the question is where prey gathers. Each organism is responding to a clock. Not a clock with hands, but a resource clock. Flesh clock, sediment clock, bone lipid clock, sulfide clock, hard substrate clock. The whale fall is time made edible, and every resident experiences that time differently. A large shark may arrive early and leave when the flesh is less rewarding. A worm may arrive later and spend its whole life in one patch of bone. A bacterium may bloom when chemical conditions become favorable and vanish when they change. A mussel or clam associated with chemosynthetic bacteria may persist where sulfide is available. A suspension feeder may use the remaining bones as a surface after the rich organic stage has faded. The whale is never one thing to all of them.
It is a sequence of invitations. The term succession can make the process sound orderly, almost botanical, as if a whale fall were a meadow changing predictably from bare ground to grasses to shrubs to forest. But in the deep sea, succession is complicated by currents, scavenger intensity, carcass size, local species, and chance. A whale that lands near a population of certain scavengers may lose flesh quickly. Another may remain soft longer. One skeleton may host dense ossidax growth. Another may show different colonizers. One may become a strong sulfide source. Another may be scattered before that stage fully develops. Nature has patterns, but it also has improvisations. That is part of why returning to the same fall matters. The first visit is a question. The second visit begins an answer.
By the third, the site has become a story with memory. Scientists can compare footage. Here, the body was intact. Here, the ribs were exposed. Here, bacterial mats spread. Here, worms appeared. Here, the bones collapsed. Here, the community changed. The whale, though dead, becomes one of the rare deep-sea events that can be followed through time. When a remotely operated vehicle descends to a known whale fall, it enters a place that has already been imagined for months or years by the people returning to it. Coordinates are entered, maps are checked, weather is negotiated, equipment is prepared. The vehicle drops through the water column, past the last light, past drifting particles, past animals that appear in the lamps and vanish. Hours may pass. Then the bottom comes into view. Mud, rocks perhaps, tracks. The vehicle navigates. The scientists watch. There is always the possibility that the site has changed more than expected, or that sediment has shifted, or that visibility is poor, or that the beacon is gone, or that the carcass is not where memory left it. Then the bones appear. There is recognition. Not recognition in the sentimental sense, perhaps, but in the scientific one. This is the same fall, the same animal, the same experiment of nature continuing in our absence. The whale did not wait for the researchers, but it kept changing while they were gone. That fact gives the footage its quiet power. The deep ocean does not need observation to proceed. Observation only lets us join it briefly.
In some famous cases, whale falls have been revisited across many years, revealing a kind of afterlife longer than the public imagination usually allows. We tend to think of decomposition as a short process, because on land we see bodies taken apart by insects, weather, microbes, scavengers, and seasons. But in the deep sea, cold water slows many processes. Pressure changes gases. Large bones hold resources. The animal can remain ecologically important long after the shape of the whale is gone. A whale fall can outlast the memory of the individual whale at the surface. Calves born after its death may become adults while its bones still feed worms. Storms may cross the ocean above. Ships may pass. Human news may rise and vanish. Entire seasons of plankton may bloom and collapse, and below, in the cold, a rib may continue releasing energy through microbial chemistry. A plume of worms may still lift into the water. A crab may still walk over the old architecture of a migration that ended years before. There is humility in that timescale. It reminds us that the ocean's sense of an event is different from ours. We notice the dramatic, the stranding, the floating carcass, the discovery by submersible, the strange worm, the skeleton in the lights. The ocean continues through processes that are less theatrical, but more complete. It takes the whale apart at many scales, from the bite marks of sharks to the enzymes of bacteria. It does not rush to closure. The phrase "graveyard that creates life" feels like a contradiction only because humans have separated those ideas in our minds. A graveyard is a place of ending, memory, stillness. A nursery is a place of beginning, growth, motion. On the sea floor, the two can occupy the same coordinates. The whale's bones are grave markers and foundation beams. The mud is both burial ground and feeding ground. The worms are mourners only in the sense that they attend the dead, but they are also farmers, miners, engineers, parents. No ceremony is required. The ceremony is metabolism. A crab feeding in the rib cage is performing the ancient rite of matter returning to matter. A bacterium reducing sulfate is participating in a chemical liturgy older than language.
An Osedax larva settling into bone is entering a lineage of improbable survival. The deep sea does not speak in symbols, but symbols gather there anyway because the scene is too powerful for the human mind to leave untouched. Still, the science must remain grounded. Whale falls are not magic. They are ecosystems fueled by organic material and shaped by well-studied processes: scavenging, enrichment, microbial decomposition, chemosynthesis, colonization, dispersal, predation. Their wonder does not come from being beyond explanation. It comes from being explainable and still astonishing. That is the best kind of mystery. Not a blank space where knowledge has failed. A door that opens wider the more carefully we look. The deeper the story goes, the less the whale seems like a single animal, and the more it becomes a meeting place between forms of life that usually remain separate. A shark and a bacterium do not experience the whale fall in any comparable way. One arrives as a large body with senses and muscle and a long evolutionary history of scavenging. The other responds through chemistry, through gradients, through contact with molecules smaller than any image can hold. Yet, both are linked by the same carcass. A worm without a mouth and a crab with claws, a mussel with symbiotic bacteria, and a fish passing through for prey, all become participants in the same temporary system. The whale is the thing they have in common. This makes whale falls useful to science not only as curiosities, but as natural experiments in connection. They let researchers study how communities assemble around a sudden resource. They show how energy moves through deep-sea food webs. They reveal links among whale falls, vents, seeps, and other chemically rich habitats. They offer clues about dispersal, how larvae find rare places, how populations remain connected across enormous distances, how specialized animals survive when their homes appear unpredictably and disappear inevitably.
On land, we can see corridors, a river valley, a forest edge, a migration path. In the deep sea, corridors can be more abstract. A larva may travel with currents from one whale fall to another, or from a seep to a fall, or between habitats that share chemical features. The map is not drawn in roads, but in water movement, depth, chemistry, timing, and chance. For some organisms, a dead whale is not an isolated grave. It is one station in a network of dark oases. But networks can break. This is where the history of whaling enters the story, not as a sudden lecture, but as a shadow over the seafloor. For centuries, humans hunted whales for oil, meat, baleen, and profit. Industrial whaling reduced many great whale populations dramatically. The losses are usually measured at the surface. Fewer blows on the horizon, fewer songs, fewer animals returning to feeding grounds, cultures and ecosystems altered by absence. But there is another loss below the visible ocean. Fewer whales living means fewer whales dying naturally at sea. Fewer whale deaths at sea means fewer whale falls. And fewer whale falls mean less habitat for the animals that depend on them. It is a haunting idea, because the destruction did not end with the hunted animal. When a whale was killed and brought to shore or processed by ships, its body was removed from the path that might have carried it downward. The deep sea lost not only a future carcass, but a future community. A fall that never happened cannot be filmed. The worms that might have colonized it left no record. The scavengers that might have fed there took other routes. The chemical island that might have burned slowly for decades was never lit. Human extraction reached into the abyss without needing to touch it. This is not to say every whale would have sunk intact, or every carcass would have become a deep-sea oasis. Some wash ashore, some are eaten near the surface, some decompose in shallow water, some are dispersed. The ocean has many endings for whales, but at the scale of entire populations, the reduction of great whales likely reduced the frequency and distribution of whale falls. For organisms specialized to rare, temporary habitats, frequency matters. Distance matters. Size matters. A larger whale can feed a community longer than a smaller body. A shorter gap between falls may allow larvae a better chance of finding the next home.
The deep remembers abundance through opportunity. When opportunity becomes rare, some forms of life may become rarer too. There is something especially difficult about losses that occur before discovery. By the time scientists began to understand whale fall ecosystems, many whale populations had already been heavily depleted for generations. We did not know what the original deep-sea map of whale falls looked like. We met the system after it had been altered. The first clear observations came not at the beginning of human impact, but after centuries of removal. In that sense, the whale falls we study may be remnants of a much richer pattern, a ghost ecology. Not gone entirely, but thinned. A modern whale fall is therefore both a natural event and a historical clue. It shows what one carcass can do. It also hints at what thousands more might have done when oceans held more giants. Imagine migration routes not only as paths of living whales, but as future lines of falling bodies over centuries. Feeding grounds where old or sick animals eventually sank. Breeding routes where deaths occurred far from land. Cold basins receiving the final weight of animals born decades earlier. Each fall, an island. Each island, a chance for larvae, microbes, scavengers, and specialists. Each one part of a deeper pattern of renewal. The tragedy of whaling is usually told in blood, oil, and near extinction. It can also be told in missing bones. In the deep, absence is not dramatic. There is no empty outline where a whale fall should have been, no marker, no silence different from the surrounding silence. The seafloor simply continues as food-poor mud. A worm larva drifts and finds nothing. A scavenger never turns toward a scent. A community never assembles. Some losses leave ruins. Others leave only fewer beginnings. And yet, the story is not only one of damage. Many whale populations have been protected from commercial hunting, and some have recovered significantly, though unevenly and with continuing threats. Ship strikes, entanglement, noise, climate change, prey shifts, and pollution still shape their futures. Recovery is never simple, but every whale that lives long enough to die naturally at sea restores more than an individual ending. It restores the possibility of descent. It restores somewhere a future fall. A living whale is therefore connected to creatures it will never encounter in life. An Osedax worm does not meet the whale while it swims. A deep-sea clam does not hear its song. A hagfish on the abyssal floor does not know the migration routes above. But their futures may depend on the whale's body arriving after death. The relationship is delayed, hidden, and one-sided, but it is real. This delayed relationship changes the emotional texture of conservation. Protecting whales is not only protecting whales, it is protecting the pathways of matter through the ocean, the nutrient pumps, the surface blooms, the deep falls, the unseen communities that gather around bones. It is protecting events that may occur decades from now in places no one will witness. That is hard for the human mind, which likes immediate evidence. but the ocean often works through delayed gifts. A whale born today may spend 60 years moving through the sea. It may migrate between poles and tropics, feeding and fasting, singing or listening, carrying scars and memory. It may survive nets, ships, hunger, heat waves, and noise. Then, far from shore, it may die. If the body sinks, the ecological consequence of that birth continues below for years or decades more. Protection given in one century may feed the sea floor in another. There is a moral patience in that idea, though the ocean itself is not moral. It asks us to think beyond the visible animal, beyond the living spectacle, beyond the surface where sympathy comes easily. It asks us to care for processes we may never see. A whale fall is a lesson in hidden continuity. It says that the life of a giant does not end at the boundary of its skin, and its death does not end at the moment of stillness. The deep sea is full of these delayed consequences. Some are natural, some are human-made. A fishing net lost at the surface may continue catching animals below. A piece of plastic may descend and remain. A shipwreck may become habitat. A carcass may become a feast. The seafloor receives what the upper world releases, whether gift or harm. It is not separate from us. It is downstream of everything.
A whale fall is one of the more beautiful things we send down, though send is not quite the right word. We do not send it when it happens naturally. We allow it by allowing whales to live. We allow the ocean to complete a process older than our economies, older than our maps, older than the idea that the deep was empty. Somewhere in the dark, a skeleton may be feeding animals that would not exist there otherwise, and no one knows its name. That anonymity feels important. The whale does not need to be famous. It does not need to be seen by scientists. It does not need a camera or a documentary or a coordinate in a database to matter. Most whale falls will never be discovered. Their communities will rise and fade without human witness. Their worms will bloom and die. Their bones will be opened by bacteria. Their carbon will enter the dark. Their story will be complete without being told. The telling is for us. The process is for the ocean. There is another way to look at the whale fall, not from the point of view of the whale or the scientist or the scavenger, but from the point of view of carbon. Carbon does not care about form. It can be gas, sugar, fat, shell, muscle, mud, dissolved molecule, bacterial cell, the oil inside a whalebone. It moves through the planet by changing masks. At the surface of the ocean, phytoplankton use sunlight to draw carbon into living matter. Some of that matter enters tiny grazers. Some enters fish. Some enters krill. Some enters whales. A whale's body is therefore not simply flesh. It is a temporary arrangement of carbon gathered from a wide field of ocean productivity. When the whale dies and sinks, some of that carbon is transferred to the deep sea floor. There, depending on what happens next, it may feed animals, microbes, and chemical communities. Some may be respired. Some may be buried. Some may remain in deep water away from the atmosphere for long periods. Scientists are careful with claims about whales and climate because the ocean carbon cycle is vast, complex, and not easily reduced to a simple number. But even with caution, the direction of the story is clear. Whales move carbon through living bodies, and whale falls are one route by which that carbon reaches the deep sea. The whale fall is not only an ecosystem, it is a delivery. A delivery from sunlight to darkness, from atmosphere-connected surface waters to the cold floor, from motion to sediment. The animal becomes a vehicle for material that has crossed scales, microscopic plankton to one of the largest bodies ever made by life, then back down into microbes and worms. The size difference alone is enough to make the imagination pause. A blue whale may feed on creatures small enough to gather in the millions, then become food for organisms small enough to vanish between grains of mud. The giant is built from the tiny. Then the tiny dismantle the giant. This circularity can sound poetic, but it is also practical. Ecosystems persist because matter is reused. The deep sea, despite its strangeness, follows this same planetary discipline. Nothing living escapes chemistry. Every body is borrowed. The whale borrows from the ocean while alive. After death, the ocean borrows the whale back. On land, we often bury our dead in ways that separate them from scavengers. We preserve, contain, mark, and protect remains because human grief has its own needs. But the more than human world is built from exposure. A fallen tree becomes fungi, beetles, soil, seedlings. A dead seal becomes gulls, crabs, bacteria. A salmon carcass feeds forests through bears and rivers. A whale fall is the deep ocean version of this old law, magnified to the scale of giants and prolonged by cold. It is not cruel. It is intimate. The whale's body enters other bodies. The boundary that once made it an individual softens. For years, the question, "Where is the whale?" becomes impossible to answer cleanly. Part of it is in the shark that fed and swam away, part in a cloud of amphipods, part in a worm's eggs, part in bacterial biomass, part in the sediment, part in the water as dissolved compounds, part still in the bones, waiting for the slow work of specialists. The whale becomes plural. Maybe that is why whale falls feel philosophical without needing philosophy placed on top of them. They show matter doing what matter does. They show individuality dissolving, not into nothing, but into relationship. They do not comfort in a simple way. The whale is still dead. The animal that breathed and moved is gone. But the body has not become meaningless. It has become available. Available is a strange word for death. In the deep sea, it is exact. The availability of the whale changes as it decomposes. Soft tissue is available to large scavengers. Small scraps and enriched sediments become available to smaller opportunists. Bone lipids become available to bacteria and worms that can access them. Mineral surfaces become available to animals needing hard substrate. Each transformation opens one door while closing another. The whale fall is a building with rooms that appear and vanish over time. The first room is flesh. The second is mud. The third is bone chemistry. The fourth is surface. But even this is too neat, because life moves through walls. A crab may feed early and late. Bacteria are present from the beginning. Predators come and go. Sediment and bone exchange chemistry. The rooms overlap. A whale fall is less like a house and more like a tide pool that changes over decades instead of hours. In some footage, the bones are covered in white or yellowish bacterial mats. They can look like cloth draped over the skeleton, or frost, or mold, depending on the angle of the lights. These mats are not decorative. They are living interfaces where chemistry becomes food. Bacteria capable of using reduced compounds form the base of local food webs, directly or through symbioses with animals. Around them gather grazers, hosts, predators, and opportunists. The whalebone becomes a chemical shoreline.
The comparison to hydrothermal vents is tempting because both can support communities independent of direct sunlight. But a whale fall is not a vent. It is not powered by heat from Earth's interior. It is powered by the stored organic richness of an animal. Still, the connection matters. Some researchers have wondered whether whale falls help certain lineages move among sulfide-rich habitats, acting as stepping stones between vents and seeps, or as evolutionary laboratories in their own right. The idea is not that all these systems are the same, but that life can recognize overlapping opportunities. Sulfide, hard substrate, chemical energy, shelter, organic enrichment.
The deep sea is full of specialists in rare chances. That specialization carries risk. To be good at living on whalebone is to depend on whalebone existing somewhere. To depend on whalebone is to depend on whales, and not just living whales as a symbol, but dead whales as physical events distributed through space and time. It is an ecological dependence built on mortality. Every species depends on death somewhere. Even the most peaceful meadow is rooted in decomposition. Even the clearest reef recycles bodies. But whale fall specialists make the dependence visible. They live where death is local, named by shape, marked by ribs. There are likely many such relationships we still do not know. The deep sea remains one of the least observed parts of the planet. New species are discovered there, not because nature is trying to surprise us, but because we have barely looked. A whale fall concentrates life in a way that makes discovery more likely. It draws organisms together into the camera's reach. It exposes the hidden creativity of the bottom. In that sense, each observed whale fall is not only an ecosystem, it is a window into all the life we usually miss. Consider the first scientists who saw a whale skeleton supporting chemosynthetic communities. They were not merely seeing scavengers. Scavengers made sense. Anything with flesh will attract mouths. The more startling realization was that bones themselves, long after flesh had been removed, could support rich communities through sulfide production and microbial processes. The skeleton was not inert. It was an engine. It could do some ecological work, similar in consequence, though not in origin, to seeps and vents. That realization changed the emotional character of the bones. A skeleton is often a symbol of emptiness. The animal gone, the soft life removed, a white remainder. But in a whale fall, the skeleton is not an empty symbol. It is active. It leaks richness. It shelters bacteria. It feeds worms. It holds the final, slow-burning part of the whale's stored energy. Bone is not the end of the body. It is a delayed feast. This delay is essential. If the whole whale were consumed quickly, the fall would be a brief event, important but not enduring. The bones extend time. They make the ecosystem last. They allow slower colonizers to arrive. They sustain microbial communities after the dramatic scavenging is over. They turn an event into a habitat. Time is the hidden ingredient. In a cold, deep basin where processes can unfold slowly, a whale's skeleton can become a long-term source of energy. Years pass. The visible remains change. The surrounding community shifts. The fall becomes less a banquet and more an address. Some animals may spend their entire lives there. Generations of smaller organisms may rise and end before the bone is exhausted. The whale's death becomes longer than many lives it supports. There is an almost unbearable inversion there. The giant dies once. The small live many times. A shrimp may never know anything beyond the chemical neighborhood of that carcass. A worm may settle, grow,
release larvae, and die within the span of the whale's decomposition. Bacteria may pass through countless generations while a rib slowly loses its oils. The whale's single ending becomes a sequence of beginnings too numerous to count. And because most of this happens in darkness, without spectacle, it challenges the way humans assign importance. We often value what is visible, charismatic, dramatic. A living whale at the surface receives awe, and rightly so, but a dead whale in the abyss, covered in worms and microbes, is equally part of the living planet. It may be less graceful, less easy to love, but it reveals the architecture beneath grace. The ocean does not waste awe on appearances. It spends everything. The more one learns about whale falls, the more the word graveyard begins to shift. A graveyard, in human terms, is usually arranged. Stones in rows, names, dates, paths, grass cut short, silence preserved as respect. But the graveyards of the deep are unplanned and scattered across a darkness too large to map completely. No two are placed with intention. A whale dies where life, age, illness, hunger, migration, accident, or weather leaves it. The body sinks according to currents, buoyancy, decomposition, and the shape of the seafloor below. It may land on mud, rock, slope, canyon, plain, seep field, or sediment disturbed by other forces. There is no cemetery gate, no boundary, only arrival.
And yet these graves are not anonymous to the animals that find them. To them, the whale fall is the most important place in the world for as long as it lasts. A hagfish does not care whether the skeleton is a blue whale or a gray whale in any human sense. It cares about flesh, access, competition. A worm larva does not care about the whale's migration history. It cares about bone. Bacteria do not care about the shape of the skull as an emblem. They care about molecules and redox conditions and energy. But together, without reverence, they create a form of attention more complete than mourning. They use every part. Human mourning often tries to hold the dead in memory. The whale fall holds the dead in circulation. There is no contradiction between these forms of meaning, but they feel different in the body. To watch a whale breathe is to feel kinship across distance. To watch a whale fall feed scavengers is to feel kinship become uncomfortable because it includes being eaten. It includes the truth that bodies are not possessions forever. It includes the possibility that dignity is not always preservation. Sometimes dignity is participation. The deep sea does not preserve whales as monuments. It transforms them into process. This transformation can look harsh when the carcass is fresh. The early stage is not quiet in form, even if it is quiet in sound. Mouths tear, bodies crowd, soft tissues are pulled apart. The whale, if we imagine it too strongly as the living animal it was, seems violated. But that feeling belongs to us. In ecological terms, the body is being opened into usefulness. Energy locked away in massive tissues is being released into a hungry system. The violence is not separate from generosity. It is the mechanism by which generosity occurs. This is one reason whale falls are so emotionally complex. They do not offer the clean comfort of a gentle circle of life. The circle is real, but it has teeth. It has slime, bacteria, sulfide, mud, and bone-boring worms. It has animals arriving because another animal can no longer defend itself. It has beauty that cannot be separated from consumption. To soften it too much would be dishonest.
To call it only grotesque would be blind.
The truth is stranger and larger. A whale fall is both terrible and giving. The word terrible here should be heard in its older sense, not simply bad, but full of awe, able to shake the mind. A massive creature dies. Its body sinks into permanent night. Scavengers dismantle it. Microbes rework it. Worms root into its skeleton. Chemical communities rise from its bones. The seafloor, briefly enriched, becomes dense with lives that owe their chance to the end of one enormous body. There is no simple moral here. There is only reality, intricate enough to feel sacred without needing to be called that. In the cold, the whale's skin may loosen, the jaw may separate, vertebrae may settle unevenly into the mud, bones may be dragged or shifted by scavengers. Currents may bury parts of the skeleton. A rib that once expanded with breath may become a perch. The skull may shelter an octopus or fish. The spine may become a line along which communities cluster. The anatomy of life becomes the architecture of afterlife. This architecture is temporary, but temporary does not mean insignificant. A bloom of plankton is temporary. A storm is temporary. A childhood is temporary. A migration is temporary. Many of the most powerful forces in nature are events, not permanent structures. Whale falls belong to that category. They matter because they happen, not because they last forever. Still, they can last long enough to shape evolution. If whale falls have occurred for tens of millions of years, then deep-sea organisms have had enormous time to adapt to them. Bone-boring traces in fossil whale remains suggest that ancient whale falls hosted specialized forms of life long before modern scientists found osedacs in living oceans. The exact histories are complex and still studied, but the larger implication is profound. Dead whales have been influencing deep-sea evolution for a very long time. The graveyard is not just ecological, it is evolutionary. Evolution works through opportunity and constraint. A whale fall offers both. It is rich but rare, nourishing but temporary, easy to exploit once found but difficult to locate. Such conditions can favor larvae that disperse widely, rapid growth, unusual reproductive strategies, symbioses with microbes, and flexibility in resource use. The weirdness of osedacs is not random decoration. It makes sense in the context of a habitat that appears unpredictably, feeds intensely, and then disappears. The deep sea rewards patience, but whale falls also reward speed. That combination creates strange lives. A larva may drift for an unknown distance, waiting in a state that is almost pure possibility. If it settles on ordinary mud, nothing comes of it. If it lands on the right bone, everything changes. It begins to grow into a body adapted not to grazing, hunting, or filtering in the usual way, but to entering the remains of a giant. Its roots spread into bone. Its bacteria help digest what the worm cannot digest alone. Its plume reaches into the cold water, taking in oxygen. It releases eggs into the same darkness that once made its own arrival so unlikely. The next generation leaves without a map. They inherit no certainty, only the ancient gamble that somewhere another whale has fallen. This gamble ties the fate of tiny animals to the life histories of some of Earth's largest beings. It is difficult to imagine a more dramatic difference in scale. A whale may migrate thousands of kilometers. A worm may live rooted in one bone. A whale may communicate across long distances through sound. A worm has no mouth. A whale rises to breathe air.
A worm depends on bacteria in a skeleton under crushing pressure. Yet the worm's world is made possible by the whale's world. The planet is full of such hidden dependencies. Forest fungi depending on tree roots, coral depending on algae, grazers depending on grasslands shaped by fire and rain. But whale falls make dependency visible because the connection is so stark. The largest body becomes the smallest habitat. The end of one life becomes the condition for many others. The surface becomes the foundation of the abyss. This is why the title, Graveyards That Create Life, is not just poetic language. It is ecological description. The graveyard is not a metaphor imposed from outside. It is a physical site of remains. The life is not vague inspiration. It is measurable. Scavenger activity, community succession, microbial mats, invertebrate colonization, chemosynthetic production, species discovery. The mystery is not whether life appears. The mystery is how precisely it arrives, how many forms it takes, and how long the dead can keep giving.
On some whale falls, the answer begins almost immediately. On others, it continues for decades. In the end, even the bones diminish. Osedax and microbes and chemistry and time can weaken the skeleton until recognizable structures collapse. What once looked like the frame of a giant becomes fragments. Fragments sink into sediment. Mineral remains may persist as hard substrate, hosting animals that need attachment points. Eventually, perhaps, the site becomes difficult to separate from ordinary seafloor. The whale fall fades back into the abyss. But fading is not failure. Completion in nature often looks like disappearance. A fruit disappears into the animal that ate it and into the seed carried away. A leaf disappears into soil. A salmon disappears into riverbank forests. A whale disappears into the deep community. The disappearance is the evidence that the gift has been accepted. When scientists return to an old fall and find less of it, there may be a strange double feeling. Loss because the visible skeleton is diminishing. Satisfaction because the system is working. The bones are not being erased meaninglessly. They are being used. The whale is finishing its final migration through the bodies of others. There is a kind of peace in that. But it is not the peace of stillness. It is the peace of movement, continuing beyond the individual form. Sometimes the ocean allows us to see one of these places by accident. A vehicle is sent down for another purpose, to survey a seamount, to inspect a canyon, to map a seep, to test equipment, to follow a line of scientific questions that has nothing to do with whales. The descent takes hours. The seafloor comes into view. Rocks, corals, sponges, sediment, fish. Then the lamps catch a shape that does not match the surrounding geology. A whiteness too curved, a line too regular. A skull, perhaps, or ribs spread across the bottom. The scientists in the control room lean toward the screen. Voices become sharper. The vehicle slows. There it is. A whale no one saw die. A grave no one made. A community already in progress. One widely shared discovery occurred near Davidson Seamount, deep within the Monterey Bay region, where a whale skeleton was found more than 10,000 feet below the surface. In the footage, the bones rest in a world of black water and scattered life, and the scene has the eerie calm of a cathedral after everyone has left, except that everyone has not left. Animals are still there. Worms, octopus, fish, crustaceans.
The skeleton is not a relic. It is an active address on the sea floor. Such discoveries feel cinematic because they bring two scales of mystery together. There is the mystery of the individual animal. What species was it? How did it die? How long has it been here? What did its life look like above? Then there is the larger mystery of the ecosystem. Who found it first? What stages has it passed through? What creatures are using it now? How long will it continue to matter? A whale fall is both biography and process, and the camera can only answer parts of either. Scientists often must infer the age of a fall from what remains. Fresh tissue suggests an early stage. Exposed bones with scavenger traces suggest time has passed. Dense bacterial mats or bone-eating worms suggest later processes. The presence or absence of certain animals offers clues. The condition of the skeleton, the amount of sediment cover, the degree of bone erosion, the community composition, all become evidence. The dead whale is read like a document written in decomposition. But the document is incomplete. Currents may have carried away pieces. Scavengers may have scattered bones. Sediment may hide key details. Some animals may have visited before the camera arrived and left no obvious sign. The beginning is almost always missing. The final end may be beyond the patience of the project. Even when scientists deliberately sink a carcass to study it, the deep sea retains its secrecy. The vehicle can visit only when weather, funding, equipment, and schedules permit. The whale continues every hour between visits.
This is part of the atmosphere of deep-sea science. Knowledge built from brief descents into a world that is always going on without us. A research team might spend years studying a site, yet their direct observation amounts to hours of light inside decades of darkness. They send down instruments, cameras, sampling gear, manipulator arms. They collect bone, sediment, worms, water, images. They bring fragments of the fall back into laboratories where microscopes and DNA sequencing can reveal what the camera could not. But the living event remains below. The ship leaves, the sea closes, the coordinates return to darkness. There is a profound humility in studying something that cannot be fully brought to the surface without destroying it. A whale fall is not a specimen in the ordinary sense. It is a place. To understand it, scientists must disturb it carefully, if at all. A bone sample can reveal bacteria and worms. A sediment core can reveal chemistry and tiny organisms. A time-lapse camera can reveal visitors. But every act of sampling changes the site slightly. The best research tries to balance curiosity with restraint, because the object of study is not just dead matter. It is living community. The technology itself adds another layer of strangeness. A remotely operated vehicle descending through black water is a kind of metal animal tethered to human intention. It carries lights brighter than anything the bottom usually knows. It has thrusters, cameras, mechanical arms, sampling boxes. It hovers where no human body could survive unprotected. Around it, deep-sea animals react in ways we may not fully understand. Some flee, some ignore it, some approach the light. The vehicle is both observer and intrusion. When its lamps pass over a whale fall, the site becomes visible in a way it never is naturally. In ordinary darkness, animals sense by touch, smell, vibration, chemistry, faint bioluminescence, and other cues. The bright image we see is partly our invention. The bones look theatrical because we have lit them like a stage. Yet the processes are real.
The community does not exist for the camera. It existed before the light arrived and continues after the light leaves. This tension is present in all deep ocean footage. We are seeing truth, but under artificial illumination. The darkness is the real condition. The cinematic image is a translation. Perhaps that is why whale falls hold attention so strongly. They look like ruins, and humans are drawn to ruins because ruins make time visible. A collapsed temple, a shipwreck, an abandoned house, a fossil bed. These places let the present touch what has ended. A whale fall is a ruin made of biology. But unlike many ruins, it is not only a monument to what was, it is actively becoming something else. The rib is a bridge. The skull is shelter. The vertebra is food. The sediment is enriched ground. The ruin has tenants. The idea of a whale fall as a ruin can be useful, as long as we remember that ruins in nature are rarely empty. A fallen tree in a forest is a ruin of a tree and a home for fungi, beetles, moss, salamanders, seedlings. A coral skeleton is a ruin of polyps and a surface for algae, invertebrates, fish. A whale skeleton is a ruin of migration and a home for deep-sea life. The world is built from remains that are not finished being useful. In this sense, whale falls are not exceptions. They are extreme examples of a general law. Their size makes the law visible. Their depth makes it mysterious. Their communities make it strange. But the underlying pattern is everywhere. Bodies become habitats. Energy moves. Death is metabolized. Still, the deep ocean gives the pattern a special gravity. Because down there, away from sunlight, a whale is not just another carcass. It is an event that can reorganize a patch of seafloor for years. It is a sudden concentration of what the bottom usually receives only in tiny pieces. It is a rare chance for abundance in a realm defined by distance from the surface factory of life. The surface ocean is bright with production. Phytoplankton bloom when light and nutrients allow. Zooplankton graze, fish feed, whales filter or hunt. Energy moves quickly, visibly, seasonally. The deep sea floor is connected to that production, but indirectly, through sinking particles and falling bodies. Whale falls are among the most dramatic of those connections. They are the surface ocean arriving late and whole.
A whale that fed in polar waters may land in a deep basin far from where it gained most of its mass. Its body can carry nutrients across space before delivering them downward. This horizontal and vertical movement is part of what makes whales ecosystem engineers. They do not simply live in the ocean. They help move fertility through it. Their deaths are one final engineering act, not intentional, but consequential. The more carefully we look, the less any organism appears alone. The whale is linked to krill, krill to phytoplankton, phytoplankton to light and nutrients. The whales fall to scavengers, scavengers to predators, bones to bacteria, bacteria to worms and clams, worm larvae to currents, currents to distant skeletons to the survival of species. The chain is not a straight line. It is a web of transfers, and the whale fall is one knot where many strands become visible. This is why the scene feels both scientific and spiritual, though the spirituality, if present, comes from attention rather than belief. To see the world as exchange is to feel the self loosen. The whale was not self-contained.
Neither are the worms. Neither are we. Every body is a temporary agreement among materials that have belonged elsewhere and will belong elsewhere again. The deep sea teaches this without speaking. There is a quieter mystery inside the whale fall, one that does not announce itself in the shape of bones or the arrival of sharks. It is the question of finding. How does life find something so rare in a place so enormous? A whale carcass on the deep sea floor is not like a fruit tree in a forest, returning each season to the same branch. It is unpredictable. It may appear in one canyon this decade, another basin the next. It may be hundreds or thousands of meters deep. It may be partially buried. It may be consumed quickly or last long enough for later colonizers. To specialize in such a habitat is to live by a map that changes before it can be learned.
For mobile scavengers, smell and movement solve part of the problem. Currents carry chemical traces from the carcass. Animals adapted to detect those traces can follow them upstream, or at least orient toward increasing concentration. A carcass becomes a plume in the water, an invisible trail written outward from the body. In the deep, a scent plume can be more important than a visual horizon. There is no horizon in the usual sense. There is only darkness, current, and the information dissolved in it. For larvae, the problem is more delicate. Many deep-sea invertebrates begin life as tiny drifting forms. They may rise or remain near the bottom, ride currents, respond to chemical cues, delay settlement, or settle when conditions feel right. But a whale fall is a small target in a vast three-dimensional ocean. The success of specialized species suggests that their larvae are either widespread, persistent, sensitive to cues, produced in enormous numbers, or some combination of all of these. Life responds to improbability with excess. Many larvae are released because many will never arrive. This is not waste in the human sense. It is the cost of living in uncertainty. Osedax has been compared to a kind of deep-sea dandelion, not because it resembles one exactly, but because it can grow quickly and send many offspring into the world. The image is useful if handled carefully. A dandelion releases seeds into air, trusting wind and abundance. A bone-eating worm releases larvae into water, trusting currents and chance. Both are fragile strategies made powerful by numbers. Both accept that most beginnings will not continue. The whale fall, then, is not merely found by life. It is waited for by life. Not consciously, not with expectation, but through evolutionary strategies shaped by rare opportunity. The deep sea carries forms that are always prepared for an arrival they may never personally encounter. Scavengers patrol, larvae drift, microbes respond. Dormant capacities awaken when conditions shift. The seafloor may look still, but it contains readiness. That readiness gives the whale fall its sense of inevitability. Once the carcass lands, the community seems to assemble almost as if summoned. But the summons works only because countless organisms already possess ways to answer. The whale does not create their adaptations in the moment. It reveals them. A place of death reveals what life has been preparing to do. This is one reason the stages feel so uncanny. They are not random animals stumbling onto a carcass. They are members of a deeper ecological choreography. The first feeders open the body. Smaller opportunists use what remains. Microbes change the chemistry. Bone specialists access hidden reserves. Hard substrate colonizers may use the mineral remnants. Each group arrives not because of a plan, but because its way of living matches a phase in the whale's decomposition.
The whale fall is a clock, and the organisms are tuned to different hours. At hour 1, flesh is abundant. At a later hour, sediment richness peaks. Later still, sulfide chemistry intensifies around bones. Later again, the organic richness declines and structure remains. But the clock does not tick evenly. It slows and speeds according to depth, temperature, species, oxygen, carcass size, and disturbance. A whale fall can be both predictable in pattern and unpredictable in detail, which is exactly the kind of system that keeps science alive. It offers enough order to study and enough variation to remain mysterious. In laboratories, samples from whale falls can look almost disappointingly small after the grandeur of the seafloor. A bit of bone, a tube containing worms, sediment in a core, a vial of water, tissue under a microscope, DNA sequences on a screen, chemical measurements in columns of data. Yet inside those small materials are answers the camera cannot provide. Which bacteria live in the worm roots? What compounds are being metabolized? How closely related are worms from different falls? Which species are new? Which are shared with vents or seeps? How fast are bones being consumed? How does the community change with depth? The cinematic scene becomes molecular. This movement between scales is one of the defining experiences of modern ocean science. A researcher can spend the morning looking at footage of a skeleton on the abyssal floor and the afternoon examining microbial genes. Both are the whale fall, the wide shot and the sequence data, the shark and the symbiont, the rib cage and the enzyme. The story is not complete at any single scale. For a voiceover, it is tempting to stay with the big images because they are easier to feel. The falling whale, the dark bottom, the bone-eating worms. But the invisible details are where much of the true strangeness lives. A mouthless worm is not simply a bizarre animal. It is a partnership. A bacterial mat is not simply a stain. It is metabolism made visible. A sulfide-rich bone is not simply rotting. It is producing conditions that allow chemosynthetic life to gather. The drama is biochemical. That kind of drama asks for a slower attention. It does not explode. It accumulates. It lives in gradients, in thresholds, in the moment oxygen becomes scarce enough for different microbes to dominate, in the way bone oils persist, in the way larvae respond to compounds released from decay. These are not images that move quickly through the human mind, but they are central to the whale fall's power. A graveyard that creates life is not doing so through symbolism. It is doing so through molecules, through protein and fat, sulfate and sulfide, carbon and nitrogen, oxygen and absence, through the patient labor of cells. If the scene feels mystical, it is because chemistry is older than mysticism, and often more astonishing. The deep ocean strips away many familiar sources of energy. No plants grow there in the ordinary sense because there is no light for photosynthesis. But life does not vanish. It reorganizes around other inputs: marine snow, predation, carcasses, chemosynthesis. The fall of a whale is one of the rare moments when the boundary between the sunlit and dark systems becomes visible as a body.
The whale is sunlight stored in meat. When it reaches the bottom, that sunlight is no longer shining, but it is still present in bonds between atoms, in fats, in tissues, in the energy that microbes and animals can use. The deep sea does not need the light itself if it receives what light once made. This is why a whale fall can seem almost like a delayed sunrise, not bright, not warm, not visible across the plain. But for the animals nearby, it changes the dayless world. It brings energy where there was little.
It creates a local morning inside permanent night. And then, slowly, the morning fades. The flesh goes, the sediments calm, the sulfide weakens. The bones become less rich. The hard surfaces remain for a while, then crumble, bury, or blend into the bottom. The community thins. The ordinary deep returns, though it is not exactly the same. Some animals have grown, some have reproduced. Some matter has been buried. Some lineages have continued. The whale fall is gone, but the consequences move outward. This is the shape of many natural gifts: arrival, flourishing, fading, dispersal. The power is not in permanence, it is in transformation. There is a particular loneliness to the idea of a whale dying in the open ocean. Not loneliness as the whale would understand it, because we cannot know that, but loneliness in the human imagination. A body that large, once so present at the surface, drifting beyond land, beyond witnesses, beyond rescue or ceremony. The sea around it continuing as it always has, waves passing over the back, birds arriving, then leaving, the horizon empty, the sky changing, the body floating until the internal gases no longer hold it up. Then the downward turn. If the whale falls far from shore, it may leave no trace above. The surface closes. The swell resumes its ordinary pattern. No marker remains to show where the giant passed beneath. Ships may cross the place later and see only water. Satellite images show nothing. The story has moved below the reach of weather. But the loneliness is ours, not the ocean's. Below, the body may become one of the least lonely places in the deep. This reversal is emotionally powerful because it changes the direction of our attention. We are used to thinking of death as withdrawal from the world. In a whale fall, death is also arrival into another community. The whale leaves the social world of whales, perhaps, but enters the metabolic world of scavengers, worms, microbes, and sediment dwellers. It loses voice and gains residence. It loses motion and gains influence. The body no longer chooses, but it still affects. That distinction matters. To say the whale gives itself to the deep can sound too intentional, too comforting. The animal does not decide to become a whale fall. It dies. Physics and biology do the rest. Yet the result is giving in effect, even if not in motive. The deep sea is sustained not by intentions, but by availabilities. A carcass available to scavengers is a gift whether or not any giver exists. The ocean is full of such impersonal generosity. A spawning fish releases eggs by the thousands, most of which become food. A dying plankton cell sinks into darkness. A kelp blade tears loose and drifts to the bottom. A seal carcass feeds amphipods. A whale becomes a city. None of this requires kindness. It requires connection. Perhaps that is why whale falls can feel calmer the longer one looks at them. At first, the scene may disturb. Bones, decay, scavengers, worms and skeletons. But slowly, the disturbance becomes understanding. The animals are not desecrating the whale. They are continuing the ocean. The bacteria are not corrupting the body. They are returning its chemistry to circulation. The worms are not invading a grave. They are living in the only place their strange bodies make sense. A viewer who stays with the image long enough may find that the skeleton becomes less macabre and more architectural. The ribs are not only remains, they are supports. The skull is not only death, it is habitat. The vertebrae are not only evidence of loss,
they are reservoirs. The whole place becomes a kind of underwater monastery of metabolism, quiet and devoted, though devoted to no idea except survival.
In the deep, survival often looks modest. A plume extended into current, a crab leg testing mud, a snail grazing film, a fish waiting in shadow, a worm root spreading unseen through bone. But modest forms can depend on immense processes. The worm plume depends on the skeleton. The skeleton depends on the whale's life. The whale's life depended on ocean productivity. Ocean productivity depended on sunlight, nutrients, circulation, climate. The smallest visible motion in the frame carries a planetary chain behind it. This is why a whale fall can hold an entire documentary inside one slow camera movement. Move from the sediment to the rib, and the story shifts from mud to anatomy. Move closer to the bacterial mat, and it shifts to chemistry. Move to the worm, and it shifts to symbiosis. Move outward to the surrounding plane, and it shifts to scarcity. Move upward in imagination through the water column, and it shifts to the surface ocean, plankton, whales, weather, and the long migration of carbon. The subject is one carcass, but the real topic is connection. A good mystery does not simply hide information. It reveals that the information is larger than expected. Whale falls do this repeatedly. The mystery begins with a dead whale on the sea floor. Then it becomes a question of scavenger succession. Then microbial chemistry. Then bone-eating worms. Then deep-sea dispersal. Then evolution. Then whaling history. Then carbon. Then the structure of ecosystems themselves. Each answer opens another room, and the rooms are dark. Not dark because they are empty, but because our knowledge enters them slowly. The deep ocean resists the quick certainty that modern life often demands. It is expensive to visit, difficult to sample, hard to observe over time. It humbles every conclusion. A scientist may say, based on available evidence, that a stage can last months or years or decades. Another fall may complicate the pattern. A new species may alter assumptions. A new technology may show behavior previously unseen. The ocean keeps some of its authority by being hard to reach. This uncertainty is not a weakness in the story. It is part of the story's atmosphere. We know enough to be astonished, not enough to be finished. There may be whale falls right now in trenches, canyons, basins, and plains that no camera will ever see. Some may be fresh, still surrounded by large scavengers. Some may be bare bones, blooming with bacterial mats. Some may be old, their last mineral surfaces hosting quiet suspension feeders. Some may be nearly gone, recognizable only to the sediment chemistry around them. Some may be supporting species not yet named, life histories not yet imagined, relationships not yet measured. The abyss is full of unobserved afterlives. This thought changes the feeling of the ocean's surface. A calm day at sea no longer looks like a blank blue expanse. Beneath it, unseen, are vertical histories. Every patch of water may sit above falling particles, migrating animals, sinking carcasses, currents carrying larvae, and dark communities waiting for what descends. The surface is not the top of the story. It is only the part that shines. When whales rise to breathe, they make the connection visible for a second. The back breaks the water. The blow hangs in air. The fluke lifts and vanishes. Then the sea closes. We are left looking at ripples. It is easy to think the whale has gone into another world, but the whale is always in the same world, the larger ocean, moving vertically through it. In life, it dives and rises. In death, if it sinks, it makes one final dive with no return. That final dive may be the deepest migration of all, not because the whale travels by will, but because its body crosses the boundary permanently. It leaves the realm of breath and enters the realm of sediment. It stops being an animal among whales and becomes an ecosystem among bones. The movement is downward, but the consequence spreads outward. For the animals waiting below, there is no elegy. There is only the first trace of scent in the current, then motion. The first trace may be unimaginably faint. A few molecules carried through cold water. A change in the chemical background. A signal spreading unevenly because the current does not move like a straight road. It curls around rocks, slides over sediment, thins, thickens, breaks, reforms. To follow it, an animal must read not a single message, but a shifting field. The deep sea is not silent to those built to sense it. It is full of gradients. The carcass becomes the source of one such gradient. Fresh tissues leak compounds into the surrounding water. Decomposition changes the mixture. Scavenger activity opens new surfaces, releasing more scent. The plume becomes stronger, then changes as the body is stripped. Later, the chemistry around the bones becomes different again. To different animals, the same whale may announce different things at different times. Come now, the flesh is rich. Come later, the mud is full. Come later still, the bones are ready. No voice says this. The molecules do. In a human story, it would be easy to imagine the whale fall as a place discovered once, then possessed. But in the deep, discovery is ongoing. A shark may discover the body early and leave. A worm larva may discover the bones years later. Bacteria discover chemical niches at microscopic scales. Predators discover gatherings of prey. Each arrival is a new first contact, even though the carcass has been there all along. This is why the site feels alive in layers. One layer is visible in the footage, animals moving over bones. Another layer is hidden in the sediment, another in the bone interior, another in the water plume, another in the genomes of organisms whose ancestors have found such places before, another in the regional oceanography that carries larvae and scent. The whale fall is a layered event, and each layer speaks a different language. To tell the story properly, one must resist reducing it to a single image. The image of the skeleton is powerful, but the skeleton is only the monument. The ecosystem includes the invisible plume, the enriched mud, the microbial metabolism, the surrounding scavenger movements, the larval dispersal, the long history of whales dying along migration routes. A whale fall is not just what the camera sees when it points its lamps at bone. It is everything that happens because the bone is there.
And because the bones are there in darkness, the ecosystem often has an atmosphere of secrecy. Not secrecy as intention, but secrecy as condition. The deep keeps things, not by hiding them deliberately, but by being immense, cold, pressurized, and far from ordinary human access. For a long time, whale falls were mostly imagined from logic. Whales died, some must sink, something must eat them. But the actual communities, the succession, the bone chemistry, the strange specialists, all of that required dissent. Dissent changes thought. It is one thing to know, intellectually, that matter cycles.
It is another to see a whale vertebra covered in living organisms at a depth where sunlight has never reached. It is one thing to say that deep-sea animals scavenge. It is another to watch a body become an entire neighborhood. The camera does not replace science. It gives science a face, or, in this case, a bone. For many people, the most unforgettable face is Osedax. The bone-eating worm seems almost designed to test the limits of what we consider normal. No mouth, no gut, roots in bone, bacteria doing hidden work, feathery plumes in the water, tiny males living in association with much larger females. Even its beauty is strange. Soft colors, fragile crowns, a body plan that seems more plant-like than animal at first glance. It unsettles categories. But once placed in its world, Osedax becomes less absurd and more elegant. A whalebone is a difficult resource, hard outside, rich inside. To exploit it, an animal must access internal lipids without chewing in the ordinary way. Roots and symbionts solve the problem. The plume solves oxygen uptake. Rapid reproduction and larval dispersal address the temporary nature of the habitat. The weirdness is functional. The animal is a poem written by constraints. The same is true of many deep-sea forms. What looks alien from the surface often makes sense under pressure, darkness, and scarcity. Large mouths, slow metabolisms, luminous lures, soft bodies, fragile limbs, chemical symbioses. These are not eccentricities for their own sake. They are solutions. The deep ocean is not a place of monsters. It is a place where familiar assumptions fail.
Whale falls amplify that failure because they combine death, abundance, and specialization in one scene. They ask us to reconsider what a skeleton can be. They ask us to reconsider what counts as a garden. A garden, after all, is a place where nutrients, surfaces, organisms, and time come together in a way that allows growth. It does not have to be green. It does not have to be planted by hands. The gardens of whale falls are pale, bacterial, worm-rooted, crab-walked, mud-soft, and cold. They bloom without light. Their flowers have blood-red plumes and no petals. Their soil is enriched sediment and bone. Their season may last decades. The phrase, graveyard that creates life, could just as truthfully be, garden made from a giant. But garden is too gentle by itself. Graveyard is too still. Whalefall holds both. It is important, too, not to imagine these communities as closed paradises. They are competitive, temporary, and often harsh. Animals fight for access. Predators take advantage. Oxygen may be depleted in enriched sediments. Sulfide can be toxic to many forms of life, even while supporting others. A carcass can create opportunity and stress at the same time. Like any ecosystem, a whale fall is not merely harmonious. It is negotiation by appetite, adaptation, and chemistry. This complexity makes it more beautiful, not less. Harmony without tension would be too simple for the deep. The whale fall's richness comes from competing processes: decay consuming oxygen, microbes producing sulfide, animals grazing bacteria, worms accessing bone, scavengers tearing flesh, predators hunting the gathered scavengers. Life does not gather around the whale in peace. It gathers in relationship. Relationship includes conflict. A crab may steal a scrap from another. A fish may eat a small crustacean drawn to the carcass. Bacteria may alter chemistry in ways that favor some species and exclude others. Worms may crowd the same bone surface. Larvae may fail to settle because the resource is already occupied or already exhausted. The whale fall is generous, but not evenly generous. The deep sea never promised fairness. It offers possibility. For organisms adapted to use it, possibility is enough. As the whale fall ages, the sense of drama changes. The early footage may show motion that humans easily recognize: biting, tearing, gathering, feeding.
Later footage can be quieter. The bones are more exposed. The large scavengers may be fewer. The activity is smaller, more dispersed, more dependent on close observation. A casual glance might miss the intensity of what remains. But the later stages are where the whale fall becomes most unlike an ordinary carcass. Here, the skeleton is no longer simply leftover structure. It is the central resource. Within whale bones, oils and fats can persist in ways soft tissue cannot. Microbes work under low oxygen conditions. Sulfide may be produced. Bacterial mats spread. Animals associated with chemical energy gather. The skeleton becomes a slow chemical hearth on the seafloor. It does not burn with flame, but with reactions. It warms nothing, yet it feeds. This slow hearth can support a community whose logic is closer to that of seeps and vents than to that of a simple scavenging site. The energy is not coming only from chewing flesh. It is coming from microbial transformation of compounds hidden inside bone. The whale's frame, the part that seems most empty to the eye, becomes the source of a second abundance. This second abundance is especially haunting because it means the body has kept something back. The first scavengers may strip the carcass until it looks finished. The flesh may be gone. The recognizable whale may have vanished. But inside the bones, another chapter is waiting. Death has reserves. The skeleton is not a period at the end of the sentence. It is a slow clause that continues after the reader has turned away. Many human encounters with nature are shaped by impatience. We like before and after. We like transformation that can be compressed into a short film, a chart, a dramatic comparison. Whale falls resist that. The important changes may occur over years, and their most significant processes may be microbial, chemical, hidden. To appreciate them, one must accept that the ocean's story is often longer than attention.
This is why the returning expedition has such emotional force. A team revisits the bones after years, and the site has aged like a living thing. Not aged toward death exactly, because it began with death, but aged through succession. The whale fall is older, and because it is older, different lives are possible there. Time has not simply reduced the carcass. Time has opened new ecological doors. A young whale fall belongs to the tearing mouth. An old whale fall belongs to the microbe, the worm, the animal that can live from chemistry and surface. Eventually, if enough organic matter is depleted, the remaining bones may function mostly as hard substrate. In the deep sea, hard surfaces can be valuable where sediment dominates. Animals that need attachment points may colonize mineral remains. The whale's final usefulness may be structural rather than nutritional. Even then, it is not nothing. A bone can raise a body slightly into current. It can provide anchorage. It can create tiny variations in flow and shelter. The last architecture of the whale may persist after the feast has ended. Then, perhaps, it becomes buried. Sediment slowly gathers. Currents shift. Small disturbances cover what is left. Bones weaken. Fragments settle. The site becomes less visible. The whale fall enters the geology of the bottom, not as a grand fossil necessarily, but as altered sediment, scattered mineral, a chemical memory fading into the plain. From a human point of view, this might seem like erasure. From the ocean's point of view, it is completion. There is no need for the whale fall to remain recognizable in order for it to have mattered. Recognition is our need. Function was the ecosystem's need. Once the function has moved through flesh, mud, bone, chemistry, and surface,
the visible remains can fade. This fading creates one of the most subtle emotional movements in the story. At the beginning, the whale is massive, almost too large to comprehend. In the end, its influence is everywhere, but its shape is gone. The body has become difficult to point to because it has succeeded in becoming other things.
The question, "Where is the whale now?" receives many answers. In the sediment, in the worm, in the crab that left, in the bacterial lineage that bloomed and divided, in larvae carried away by current, in the chemical composition of mud, in the survival of a species that needed one more island, in the memory of cameras and data, in the dark, even after the bones are hard to find. This is not metaphor alone. It is material reality. The atoms are moving. The energy has moved. The community has changed. The whale has become distributed through a network of consequences. And maybe all lives are like this, though few reveal it so dramatically. The whale fall gives scale to a truth that is otherwise too common to notice. We are all temporary concentrations of the world. We gather matter, hold it in the shape of a body, then release it. The difference is that a whale gathers so much and sinks to a place so hungry that the release becomes visible as an ecosystem. The graveyard creates life because life is what matter does when conditions allow. The deep sea, for all its darkness, is full of conditions waiting for allowance. A whale provides it. Not forever, long enough. The phrase "long enough" may be the quiet key to the whole story. A whale fall does not need to last forever. It needs to last long enough for scavengers to feed, long enough for sediments to enrich, long enough for microbes to build mats, long enough for worms to reproduce, long enough for larvae to depart, long enough for the next fall somewhere else to become possible. Ecosystems are not always built from permanence. Sometimes they are built from overlapping temporary events that keep arriving before memory disappears completely. The ocean is good at overlapping. There is always another bloom, another migration, another sinking particle, another storm, another birth, another death. Not in a tidy balance, not guaranteed, not safe from disruption, but in the long, restless pattern of a planet where nothing living holds its form indefinitely. Whale falls belong to that pattern. They are rare compared with marine snow, but immense when they occur. They punctuate the slow rain with sudden abundance.
A punctuation mark can change the meaning of a sentence. A whale fall can change the meaning of a patch of seafloor. Before the fall, the place is mud, current, sparse life, patient hunger. After the fall, it is scent plume, feast, sediment bloom, bone chemistry, microbial garden, worm forest, habitat island. Later, it becomes mud again, but not as if nothing happened. Something did happen. A giant passed through. The giant passed through twice. Once while alive, moving through water with muscle, memory, and breath. Once after death, moving through bodies smaller than its eye. The first passage may have been audible across miles if it belonged to a singing whale. The second passage is mostly silent. A crab does not announce that it carries part of the whale away. A bacterium does not mark the transformation it performs. A worm larva leaving the bone does not know it is continuing a story. The deep sea is not interested in testimony. It records events by changing. Change is the archive. A patch of enriched sediment is a record. A population bloom is a record. A bone drilled by worms is a record. A chemical anomaly in the mud is a record. A fossil skeleton with traces of ancient borers is a record. The ocean writes in alterations, not inscriptions. To read it, scientists must learn the grammar of remains. That grammar is still incomplete. Every whale fall studied adds another sentence. Some confirm patterns already suspected. Some complicate them. Some reveal species new to science, behaviors not yet described, timings that differ from expectations. The deep ocean is not a finished textbook. It is a library with most of the pages still closed. And somewhere, perhaps right now, one of those pages is being written in darkness. A whale has landed on mud. The first scavengers have found it. Or perhaps the flesh is already gone and the bones are entering their long chemical stage. Perhaps worms are blooming in clusters so dense the bone appears furred with life. Perhaps an old skeleton has almost vanished, leaving only fragments and a subtle change in sediment where a city once stood. No camera is there, no ship above, no name. The ocean proceeds without witness. That unseen continuation is part of the wonder. Modern life often teaches us to equate reality with visibility. A thing becomes important when recorded, shared, photographed, mapped. Whale falls resist that idea. The vast majority of them will never be seen, yet their importance does not depend on being seen. They feed animals whether or not a camera arrives. They alter sediment whether or not a paper is written. They sustain lineages whether or not a human name is attached. The abyss is not waiting to be validated by light. It is already alive. The cold open of a submersible discovering ribs in the dark feels like a beginning because it is our beginning. It is the moment we enter. But the whale fall began long before the lights arrived. It began in the whale's feeding years, perhaps in a bloom of plankton decades earlier. It began in the evolutionary history of scavengers and worms. It began in the sinking body and the first molecules drifting into current. By the time the camera sees the bones, the story may already be in its middle, or late middle, or approaching its quiet end. This displacement of beginnings is one of the most profound lessons of natural history. We almost never arrive at the start. We enter processes already underway and mistake our arrival for the first page. The whale fall corrects that gently. It says, "The story was here before the light. It will continue after the light leaves." In the darkness after the vehicle departs, the scene must return to its own pace. The sudden brightness fades. Sediment settles. Animals resume or adjust. The bones remain, not glowing, not framed, not dramatic, just pale structures in cold water, surrounded by the ordinary, extraordinary work of living things. The ocean does not need climax. It needs continuity. Continuity is what the whale fall provides. Not in a straight line, but in a widening pattern. The whale's life continued the lives of prey. Its death continues the lives of scavengers. Its bones continue the lives of worms and microbes. The organisms it supports may continue other lives beyond the site. The final remains may become sediment that participates in still slower cycles. Continuity does not mean the whale remains itself. It means nothing about it is simply thrown away. This is a hard lesson and a consoling one. Hard because it does not rescue the individual. The whale dies. The shape is lost. The breath does not return. The song, if there was one, ends. No ecological beauty should erase the fact of death, but consoling because the end of the individual is not the end of participation. The body remains meaningful in the most literal sense, full of meaning for other forms of life, full of usable matter, full of future. The graveyard creates life not because death is secretly pleasant, but because life has always been skilled at entering what death makes available. The seafloor is a patient witness to this skill. It receives the slow rain and the sudden giant. It receives plankton dust and shipwrecks, fish bones and woodfalls, storms translated into sediment, ash from distant fires, plastic from careless hands, and whales from the open sea. It is the planet's lower memory, layered and altered by everything above. A whale fall is one of the moments when that memory becomes crowded and animated. If we could drift above such a place without disturbing it, without lights, without machines, perhaps we would see almost nothing, just darkness. But in that darkness, chemical messages would move, mouth parts would work, bacteria would divide, worm plumes would stand in the current, crabs would step over old bone, fish would wait at the edge of the scent. The scene would be full, even if invisible. The invisible fullness is the true atmosphere of the deep, not emptiness, not silence in the sense of absence, a fullness too slow and too dark for ordinary senses. Whale falls teach us to imagine that fullness. They ask us to picture ecosystems not as fixed scenic places, but as events unfolding through matter. They ask us to understand a skeleton not as a final object, but as a process still underway. They ask us to widen the meaning of life until it includes the strange, cold, patient communities that rise from death miles below the waves.
And perhaps they ask us to treat the surface differently. Because every living whale is also a future relationship with the deep. Every protected migration, every calf that survives, every adult that feeds and grows and ages in the sea, carries not only the value of its own life, but the possibility of a final descent that will nourish lives beyond sunlight. To protect the living whale is to protect a chain of unseen afterlives. To let whales recover is to let the deep regain some of its lost islands. This does not make whales valuable only because they will die. Their lives are valuable while they are lived. Their songs, migrations, intelligence, bodies, social bonds, ecological roles. But the whale fall adds another dimension. It reminds us that even after the last breath, the whale remains part of the ocean's work. There is no waste in a complete ecosystem, only transformations interrupted or allowed. The deep sea waits for what is allowed to reach it. A whale sinks, and the waiting changes shape. In the first days or months, the fall may be a frenzy hidden under pressure. Later, a settlement. Later, a chemical garden. Later, a pale ruin with roots. Later still, a memory in the mud. At every stage, life interprets the whale differently. The carcass is never just one thing. It is feast, shelter, fuel, island, nursery, reef, archive. The same bones can be terrifying, beautiful, useful, and ordinary. That is how the ocean holds complexity. It does not choose one meaning when many are true. The rib in the submersible lights is a remnant of breath. It is also a wall for tiny animals. It is also a source of lipids. It is also evidence of a death. It is also the beginning of other lives. To stand mentally in that contradiction is to come closer to the whale fall's real nature. Not a symbol pasted over science, not a fact stripped of feeling, but a place where fact and feeling meet, because the facts themselves are emotionally enormous. The cold, the depth, the pressure, the hunger, the body, the worms, the bacteria, the decades, the missing falls, the unseen communities, the surface whale that once breathed under open sky. All of it
belongs to one story.
And the story does not end with a lesson. It thins into darkness. There is one more quiet dimension to the fall, and it lives in the space between knowledge and reverence. The whale fall is measurable. Its depth can be recorded. Its species can sometimes be identified. Its tissues can be sampled, its bones collected, its worms named, its bacteria sequenced, its chemical gradients modeled. The stages can be described, compared, debated. The numbers matter because they keep the story honest. Without them, the whale fall becomes only an image, and images can drift too easily into fantasy. But numbers do not reduce the wonder, they deepen it. To know that the first scavenging stage may last months or longer does not make the image less strange. It lets the mind feel the duration of the feast. To know that bone lipids can help support sulfide-producing microbial processes does not make the skeleton less haunting. It explains why the haunting continues. To know that a whale carcass can equal centuries of ordinary organic carbon delivery to a patch of deep seafloor does not flatten the mystery into arithmetic. It gives the mystery weight. Science, at its best, does not drain the dark of feeling. It gives the dark structure. And structure is what allows awe to remain after the first shock has passed. The first shock is simple. A dead whale feeds life. The deeper awe comes later when the parts begin to connect. The surface bloom, the feeding whale, the sinking body, the scavenger plume, the enriched sediment, the microbial chemistry, the mouthless worm, the larva entering current, the possibility of another fall somewhere beyond the known map. The system becomes more astonishing because it is not vague, it is specific. Specificity is a form of respect. To say worms eat bones is one thing. To say some of them have no mouths, no guts, root-like tissues filled with symbiotic bacteria, and plumes reaching into the oxygenated water is another. To say the deep sea is hungry is one thing. To say it is fed by marine snow drifting from photosynthetic life above, and that a whale fall interrupts that slow rain with a massive pulse of organic matter is another. To say death supports life is one thing. To follow the stages by which a whale becomes scavenger food, enriched mud, sulfide source, and hard substrate is another.
The more exact the story becomes, the less it resembles a slogan. It becomes a place. A place can be returned to. A place can be studied. A place can surprise. A place can have weather, even if that weather is chemical. A place can have residents and strangers, seasons and endings. A whale fall is a temporary place, but while it lasts, it is fully real. Perhaps that is why the best way to imagine it is not as a spectacle, but as a slow settlement in the dark. There are no crowds above, no surface sign, no announcement, just a body, a current, and the gradual arrival of lives prepared by evolution to use what the ocean has delivered. The first feeders are not thinking about ecology. The worms are not thinking about cycles. The bacteria are not thinking at all. Yet together they make a system that appears almost composed. This is the discipline of the living world. No single creature understands the whole, but the whole emerges anyway. A scavenger follows scent. A microbe follows chemistry. A larva follows cues. A predator follows prey. Each acts locally, bodily, immediately. Out of those local acts, a whale fall becomes an ecosystem. No conductor, no blueprint, no intention spread across the mud. Only need, adaptation, and matter meeting under the right conditions. That may be the most mysterious thing of all. Not that life comes from death, but that so many separate hungers can assemble into continuity. The deep sea does not tell a comforting story in the usual sense. It tells a truer one. It says that endings are real, and so are transformations. It says that the body matters. It says that what falls out of sight is not necessarily lost. It says that the unseen world is not empty simply because human eyes are absent. Far above, the surface keeps moving. Wind combs the waves. A living whale rises somewhere, exhales, and sinks again under its own power. Another swims beside its calf. Another travels through cold feeding grounds, taking into its body the tiny lives of the upper ocean. None of them are thinking of the abyss as a future. Yet the abyss is part of their story, waiting beneath every root. One day, for some whale, the dive will not turn upward. The body will pass through blue, then black. It will touch down in a place that may not have known abundance for years. The scent will move outward. The first animals will arrive. The old sequence will begin again, not as repetition exactly, but as renewal with different details. A new grave, a new garden, a new island of life in the dark. The cameras rise. The lamps pull away from the bones. The rib that began as a pale curve becomes small again. The crab is no longer visible. The worm plumes become flecks, then vanish. The skeleton recedes into the black water until the black water is all there is. Above, the vehicle climbs for hours through layers of cold and pressure. It passes through drifting particles, through zones where animals flash and disappear, through blue that slowly returns, through the underside of waves. The ship receives it. Hands guide it home. Data are saved. Samples are labeled. The day continues. Below, the whale remains, no longer illuminated, no longer observed, still changing. In the dark, a bacterium divides. A worm lifts its plume into the current. A small animal crosses the mud where the body has enriched it. Somewhere beyond the skeleton, a scavenger moves on, carrying part of the whale into another patch of night. The bones lie quiet, but not still. The grave is open. The garden is growing. And the ocean, without hurry, keeps turning one life into many.